Hey everybody, hope you're all doing good today. Just getting caught up here from being gone for 2 weeks to tournaments here. Lot to get caught up on. Lots of errands to run, lots of tackle to unload and organize for the next tournament. Going to be doing a lot of filming this week with Fish the Moment. Some shallow versus deep challenges with Johnny, getting ready for that. And just want to take a second here and put out another little informative, hopefully an informative YouTube video. And what I wanted to do today is I want to discuss really sort of have a conversation about jigs versus soft plastic creature baits, because I think a lot of people sometimes they get confused about when they need to throw what, under what conditions. And it's a pretty complex subject. I mean, because there's so many variables to this and there's so many different options. It's not like it was, 25 years ago, where back then when you talked about jig fishing, most people equated jig fishing with like flipping and pitching a 1/2 ounce black and blue jig with a pork frog. That was the jig. There wasn't, you had some niche deals with hair jigs on some of those Tennessee smallmouth lakes, but for the most part, we didn't have football head jigs, we didn't have finesse jigs, we just didn't have the options that we do now. And so it was simplified, and back then you didn't really have creature baits. The closest to that was probably something like a lizard or a craw. And so you can see where we come from there. It's just exploded as far as the options available to the anglers out there, as far as what they can choose to fish with. Now what you have is you've got flipping jigs, you've got heavy cover flipping jigs, you got braided line flipping jigs, you got fluorocarbon flipping jigs, you got football head jigs, you got swing head jigs, you got finesse jigs, you got casting jigs. You've got just an endless array of jig combinations, and the same with creature baits. There are so many dang creature baits out there that you simply can't even keep up with it. There's so many modifications and variations. I think probably the standard for a creature bait was like the original, like the Zoom brush hog. I think there's been a lot of basically copies off of that profile and creations. You've got the beaver style baits, you've got a lot of the flap and leg baits. You've got just an endless supply of it. And I remember David Dudley told me several years ago that he just doesn't hardly fish jigs anymore because there's such the soft plastic technology with the creature baits has evolved so far that he didn't feel like he needed to. But obviously there's, in my opinion, there's still a huge place for jigs, and you have to really know when to choose what to maximize your not only your numbers but your size of the bass that you could possibly catch with them. The conversation as far as with jigs, when you're talking about a seasonal type of a consideration, a lot of it has to do with, there's a lot of variables. You got water temperature, you got time of year, you got the type of fishery it is, if it's known to be a tough fishery or if it's known to have a lot of fish in it, if the fishery has a mixed bag, if it's got smallmouth, spotted bass, largemouth, what's the predominant species in that particular lake. So there's just an endless amount of variables to it. But for the sake of conversation, and we'll go into a lot more detail in future videos, because you could literally make a dozen videos off of this subject. But today what I wanted to talk about are things like you can use right now in the fall time of the year. And I want to center it basically on just a typical man-made impoundment. What I would suggest my choice is, obviously, if you get into the Florida lakes and grass lakes and Texas lakes, smallmouth fisheries, you got a completely different set of situations. But for today's YouTube video, let's just keep it to a typical man-made impoundment. It could be something, whether you're fishing Bugs Island in Virginia, if you're fishing Lake Cumberland in Kentucky, if you're fishing Lake Lanier in Georgia, if you're fishing Grand Lake in Oklahoma, that type of a setup. First of all, when I consider that to make the decision whether I want to fish a jig or soft plastic, I always want to see, and I always want to try to get them to bite a jig. Because if I can get them to bite a jig, the weight, the average size of my bass goes up anywhere between a quarter to a half a pound on average. I bet if you catch 100 bass on when I'm talking about jigs here, I'm not talking about like finesse jigs. I'm talking about just a standard casting or pitching and flipping jig, full-size jig, with a full-size trailer on it. There's, like I said, there's more conversations to have about the sub niches in the sizes and everything. But I always, if I've got to choose, let's say if I'm choosing between like a brush hog or a regular jig, I'm always trying to catch them on the jig first, simply because of the size of the fish that I can catch on those things. Also, my hookup ratio tends to be a lot better. In a typical situation, water clarity may not be that big of a deal, but it's all relative to the cover that you have in relationship to the water clarity. You can catch bass, this time of year on full-size jigs in clear water. A lot of times, if you're fishing late, I'll use example of a tournament I led the first day at Bassmaster Top 150 at Old Hickory Lake. I was flipping a jig up the river, and the water was really clear up there. The water was probably, 3-4 foot visibility, and I led the tournament the first day with almost 20 pounds flipping a black and blue jig in those clear water laydowns. So, and I just happened to get a few bites in practice on that jig that made me stay with it. I didn't get a lot of bites, but I happened to get a few. So the big thing you got to consider is the type of cover that you're fishing in relationship to the water clarity. It could be boat docks, it could be laydowns, it could be stumps, it could be just bluff banks, it could be pitching to bare banks, that type of stuff. There's always going to be some type of a jig bite existing there. The thing that you have to do initially when you're choosing a jig is you have to hit on the right color combination, trailer combination, and a size of the jig. And a lot of that has to do, with water clarity, but sometimes it has to do with time of the day and, what the crawfish colorations are in a particular lake. Most people immediately go to like a green pumpkin or brown in clear water, and a more black blue, black chartreuse, as the water gets dirty. But that's sort of an oversimplification of that. I've seen times where I've used the natural color jigs in more stained water and the darker color jigs in the clear water. So a lot of this is a matter of experimentation. I would highly suggest that when you get to a lake, just walk down to the bank and try to turn over some rocks just to get an idea of the coloration of the crawfish. And you don't have to match it exactly, but when you're talking about crawfish coloration on jigs, you just want to pay attention if they've got any specific things other than like the brown and green and black that's on the predominant jigs. Sometimes they got a little red, sometimes they got a little blue. Just pay close attention to that, because if I see some blue or red or something like that, I always want to try to match that up with some skirt strands or some trailer dyes, that type of stuff. So my first thing I always go to is a jig. Now, based upon how I'm doing with that, if I feel like I should be getting more bites than what I'm getting, or if I'm not getting bites, or if it's a tough fishery, or things are a little bit slow, that's when I make a choice and a decision to go to the soft plastic creature bait. Probably my two favorites are the Zoom Brush Hog in various sizes, and the Zoom Z-Hog and the Zoom Z-Craw. There's a lot of different other types of stuff out there. You got the beavers, I can't even keep up with it. If you go like on Tackle Warehouse and check out all the soft plastic creature baits, I mean, you'd spend $20,000 trying to have them all. So everybody's got their favorite soft plastic creature bait that they have. So when you're in a situation where you got some pitching and flipping options to that, you got to have both of these ready to go. You got to have the jig and the soft plastics. Same with the soft plastics. Color is a big deal on there. You got, most of the time you're limited to like your black and blues or your green pumpkins or your watermelons. But the difference, and one of the things that I really like about soft plastic creature baits is they're really versatile as far as using dyes with them. And I'm a big believer in dyes. I use a lot of different dye colors, not just chartreuses. I use blue, I use red, I use orange, I use black. I use a lot of different combinations with that, because you can really modify and create a look to soft plastic creature baits that are sort of aftermarket looks that the fish don't really see a lot. So if things get a little bit tough and I can't get a jig bite, that's when I go to the soft plastic creature bait. Another thing about that, say for example, if I've got a little bit of a jig bite going on, one of the big things that I can do to really up my success in a day's fishing is I'll go back through that same water with a soft plastic creature bait after I've felt that I've exhausted the area with a jig, because I can't count how many tournaments I fished where, like, the first day of the tournament I did really good on a jig, and then for the second day they just wouldn't bite it, and I made a switch to the creature bait and they started biting it really good. So the overall gist of this whole thing is that when you're in a situation where you feel that they're biting a jig or soft plastic creature bait, you've got to have both of them on the boat, because you've got to be able to sort of experiment with which one is going to get you more and more quality bites. And I've never seen a situation where that wasn't like that. Very seldom have I ever fished a tournament where it's a straight jig tournament or a straight creature bait tournament. Usually, you know, there's always mixing it up a little bit, and that's one of the things I'm really trying to do. Another big key with the jigs and the soft plastics too is the weight of your sinker weight has a lot to do with it. I think a lot of people, for the most part, on jigs and soft plastics, they go too heavy simply because it's a little bit more efficient for them. But I use, in my jigs and my soft plastic creature baits both, anywhere between an 1/8 ounce to a 1 ounce sinker. I experiment a lot, you know, with those particular sizes, and most of the time I want to go with the lighter size, the lightest size that I can get, unless I feel that the strike is completely generated by reaction. And there's some situations that are like that. If you're flipping in a little bit deeper water, a little bit clearer water, sometimes if you're flipping in mats, that type of stuff, you know, you need to generate that reaction strike from a heavier sinker. But a lot of times, from what I found, is the bigger bass want the slower fall, particularly if you can deliver it effectively and efficiently and cover a lot of water doing that. So one of the tips I would give you on both of those is to try to sort of downsize your mentality of the sinker a little bit. That has a lot to do with it too. Line size always has a big part too. I'm always wanting to use, you know, pretty much the heaviest line that I can get by with without feeling that I'm taking away from my strikes, because not only that I'm aware of the fact that, you know, lighter line's going to get you more strikes, but the rate of fall that you have with a creature bait or jig is totally dependent upon, you know, the line size you have. There's a big difference between flipping a jig on 25-pound tests and flipping that same jig on 15-pound tests. So again, I'm trying to always maximize that, you know, efficiency that I have with the line size. But anyway, if you get back to, you know, the topic of this video, it's like, when do you use soft plastic creature baits over jigs? The answer that I'm going to give you to that is you use them both at the same time. There's never one single time. I've never been at a time where I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to use a jig here and nothing else, or I'm going to use the soft plastics here and nothing else. I've been able to make a living in the sport pitching and flipping jigs and soft plastics, and I can tell you right now, you got to have both of them on the boat at the same time, and you determine which is the best tool for the time and which bait is going to be your best backup. You know, I talked about earlier about, you know, using that jig initially, then mopping up with the soft plastics. A lot of times, if I'm not getting a lot of bites on a jig, I'll try to catch a limit on the creature bait and then go to the jig to try to catch a kicker fish. But like I said, usually both are on my deck. They're just both a great way to catch big bass. So anyway, we'll do a lot more tips on this, on the jigs and creature baits. There's just an endless amount of topics that we can do that. But anyway, I just wanted to shoot this one your way, and now's a great time of year to do it. As long as that water temperature is, you know, over 60 degrees, pitching and flipping creature baits and jigs this time of year is a really good way to catch them. So anyway, hope you guys are having a good day. If you like the video, please subscribe and hit the like button on this. It really helps out. And we'll check in with y'all later on. See you.